they're not pushing back because they want to be an asshole. They're pushing back because they think it's not going to work for a reason, because they've probably done it 10 times. Whenever I push back on something, it is nothing personal. Are we positive that's the right way? If you've got the data that says yes, great.
What is going on, certified homies? Welcome to another episode of From A to B. You have Shiva, and I'm joined here by Victoria, the Warrior Sakal.
Love it.
Okay, first of all, the Warrior. I had to call you, it's Victoria, the Warrior, like a Boston accent.
Okay, it rhymes.
I was trying to figure out what rhymes with Victoria, and it was like Astoria and a bunch of locations, and I'm like, oh, these suck. And the Warrior, if I say it with a Boston accent, kind of rhymes, and that sounds badass. So you're Victoria, the Warrior Sakal.
I like it. It's more intense than Victoria Euphoria.
I was looking at that too.
We're getting down to it.
Such a weird thing in a professional world. I will never use the word euphoria in a professional setting.
No. We're talking about desserts, sure, yeah, but Warrior, we're fighting in the trenches every day.
And you are head of growth at Wonder. The reason why I wanted to have you on today was to explore a little bit of your background in, let's just say, researchers, and getting a little bit more in the mindset of researchers and how best CROs can utilize that mindset to work better with researchers. So before we start, you as a, let's say, expert researcher, as a person who understands research and understands the mindset of how research is applied, I'm going to keep on using the word research, and I'm just going to say research 50 times because apparently that's just what's happening.
It's a drinking game.
That's a drinking game. How many times
Shiva says
research?
Liquid death.
So let me first ask you this very basic question. What is CRO to you?
The aperture that I work on is sort of the full customer journey. And so to me, conversion rate is, yes, a prospect or someone interested. And then, I'm in B2B, so it could be booking a demo or getting them into our class through some action that they take. But really it spans the full customer journey. There's the conversion through each step, and not just into the capital C, we've converted the demand step. I'm looking as much from they're aware of us to now they can find us, and now they've found us on our website. They've converted into a demo or a call or whatever the CTA might be. And then from there, it's now how do we actually pipeline velocity is an element of conversion rate and something that you want to optimize. And then frankly, there's the upsell, cross-sell conversion as well. So I think about it as there's all these stages of the journey that you're converting people down, more. And of course, there's data pieces to it, but there's also the research and the setting up of the experiments that I tend to focus on.
So I hate this. I hate this because I think your view is shared among many other researchers. And I think it's frustrating because a lot of times CROs get boxed into that, CRO equals conversion rate optimization. All you do is focus on that one singular metric of that thing down the line. I talked to Nima last episode about we've grown in popularity because conversion rate optimization is sexy. But now the detriment is we're dying by the sword of that name because that's what people think we do. So I Googled a couple other things to try and figure out how do researchers view CRO. I think that's kind of aligned with what you think, which I hate, and we'll go into it. But HubSpot has this chart of UX versus CRO. And they're UX primary focus is user satisfaction and ease of use. It's flowery, awesome. And then CRO, increasing conversion rate. Fuck you, HubSpot. Sorry, not kidding. Not actually. All right. Goal for UX, create intuitive, enjoyable user experiences. CRO, improve specific user actions towards conversion. I'm some bad CROs genuinely only fixate on that one metric, that conversion rate, that downstream thing. I think good CROs are actually just UXers in math clothing, right? If a good CRO has the mindset of how research applies, CROs should care about user satisfaction and ease of use. CROs should care about creating intuitive user experiences and enjoyable experiences. The key metrics for the same HubSpot thing, they're saying UX cares about user satisfaction and task completion rate, whereas CRO only cares about conversion rate and click-through rate. And I'm what? It shouldn't be broken out where there's these two silos. Again, I think they're both basically the same thing. Would you agree with that?
It feels like the definitions that we're getting spit back are like, there's the point in time. Like if we're thinking about this, again, customer journey, and there's all these different stages, if you think about it as like whatever it is, the nodes and then the connectors getting you from node to node is the conversion rate. Whereas when you're in the node and your experience is UX. And so UX gets all the, sunshine and rainbows for like, yes, I'm in the user stage and it's a great experience, blah, blah, blah. But then something has to move me along in my journey, either spend more, do more, click more, be more, blah, 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 blah. And that's where the CRO gets like the pushy, that's like the feeling I'm getting from these definitions. Whereas both, yeah, you're exactly right. They're two sides of the same coin. Like you can't have one without the other. Because you have a shitty experience, like why would I want to keep like converting into the next thing? But at the same time, like I am converting into the next thing by way of like how that experience feels. It's not just like suddenly you're in a black hole and the only thing you can do is click this red CTA button and that's what CRO is like succeeding on. It's about the experience too.
Right. I totally agree. The node experience, I'm just visualizing it in my head and I'm like, that is so apt. It's the people in each node, but it's so stupid that, again, there's this bifurcation of like, CRO, just get the person to the next step and then don't care about anything they did on that page, which is why I say jokingly or half-heartedly, I hate your definition and I hate that perspective because to me, it's just so blatantly and patently wrong. The bad CROs absolutely only give a shit about getting that conversion to next step. The good CROs, again, are just these UXers in sheep's clothing or math clothing or whatever clothing. I was looking at a couple other articles as well. One UX person said this quote, this person will remain nameless, but if you really want to optimize conversion, you have to know why people aren't converting. I'm a big fan of experimentation, but don't forget that the fastest way to get good ideas for experimentation is to talk to people. Too many people just try to A/B test their way to better conversion. And that's another one of those like CROs are and should be talking to people. So like why there's such a stupid bifurcation when the reality is we're literally the same people. There's two sides of the same coin. I guess that's creating a bifurcation. We're on the same team. I don't know, whatever. I can't think of an analogy.
Yeah, but it's like football, right? You have three different positions or multiple different positions, but you could argue that research and UX design and CRO are three different positions, but yes, 100% all playing for the same team. Research is sort of like the raw materials that you might take, the why, the like richness of the insight. I mean, even if we use like some of this ADA compliant conversation that's extremely important right now, research is helping to understand where people are struggling with something on your website, for example. UX is then the wrapping that fixes that problem. And CRO is saying, did this work? You need the upfront conversation. Research doesn't have to be a separate person. It can be the CRO. It could be the UX person, but there are these three different roles that it's sort of like the inputs, the implications, and then is it working and what's the impact that it's having on, the subsequent action or the user's spend or whatever.
All right, we're going to table the ADA conversation because you inadvertently stumbled into the shit you need to know section. So we'll tease that for later. The last chart I saw, this was a CXL chart, and this is the only one where I agreed with some amount of bifurcation. UX is theory and heuristics, and CRO is testing and empiricism. And it almost feels like perhaps UX might dabble a little bit more in the qual, and CRO might dabble a little bit more in the quant. But again, there's so much overlap in handshake that I think a good CRO should have UX skills, and a good UX should have CRO skills, right? If you look at concentric circles, while there might be some amount of the outer ring of the concentric circles that there's not overlap, they're almost the same. To me, they're almost the same role. Yeah?
Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking with the qual versus quant kind of like stereotype almost that it's getting, is that a bad thing? Is it, in the sense that it's sort of what each is being KPI'd on, which I guess should come back to quant in both cases because there's a number that says this is working well or it's not, this needs to be fixed, or this is doing the job it needs to. I imagine that UX would almost be as offended to be associated with the feeling and the qualitative side as CRO would be offended to be just a numbers department. But I think, you're not going to hear me say that qual versus quant. It is both in research, in, designing experiences and making decisions, it has to be both. But if it is one or the other, you're going to miss something and it's going to you'll be lucky if it goes well, but it's just luck. It's not supposed to happen that way.
To be fair, I think the feelings based isn't persistent in either. I think the way that they're saying it is more like theory and heuristics, which theory and heuristics is like more academic, I guess. I was not indicating like feelings, although I definitely have some feelings. I don't know if I necessarily have strong opinions or feelings on design. If you ask me to actually design anything, I couldn't design for shit. That's not a skill that is anywhere in my body.
But it's sort of like how it's supposed to work, right? The classic expression of there's theory, and then when, there's theory and then you put it into practice, there's just more room for, and again, I just don't see how one can exist without the other. You will be more informed if you're coming in with some sort of theory and like, this is typically how it works. Doesn't mean it's how it's always going to work. And it doesn't mean that there isn't some thing that hasn't been proven and written as a theory that also doesn't work. It's just, you'll get the 80-20 of what should work from the heuristics and the theory that, the UX Bible.
Which is all the more reason why CROs need to have that UX verbiage and mindset, and UX needs to have that CRO mindset, right? Okay, sorry, my dog is freaking out at the...
Concurs, he agrees.
No, he just doesn't like the mailman.
A few moments later.
Now that we've established that there is a ton of overlap between UX and CRO, I want to understand a little bit more as to why maybe people try and create this bifurcation. I actually think there might be some logicalness to a little bit of bifurcation in that there are certain tactical tasks and roles that you can't just have a CRO do everything. I mean, you can, but that's one person or a small team doing everything is a lot of work. So I do think there is some value in delegation between UX and CRO. But I guess I'm more just, I know Nemo's pushing this a lot in the last episode. Would you disagree at all that CRO fundamentally, or I guess in principle, should sit in a UX team?
I am agreeing, but I'm trying to run through my head. What's the devil's advocate? Like, why would what's the kind of counter argument? To me, I mean, it's the same way, like if you take it to a different altitude, for me, there's strategy and there's research. And if you're just building strategy all day long and you're not rooting it in, sense check it and, test your hypotheses or your assumptions, then you're basically hoping, right? You're like, someone had an idea, figure in the air, we're going to run with it. So the same corollary to me holds in UX, where what I'm thinking is like, I guess the argument would be that if you have a UX researcher who is testing something that we've mocked up to see if it works or doesn't, I guess you don't need a CRO, but that's because that person is literally doing CRO to see if it works.
There are some other arguments around, well, if you have CRO sitting in an engineering team, and I'm not saying necessarily the team, it means maybe a particular individual or an ambassador for CRO sitting in engineering, then they can help accelerate testing velocity, get more things running through there, work on process, oversee that. That's where we talk about like different strategies around like center of excellence. It's like a team of CROs and they help consult with product marketing and website and everything else. They kind of like embedding that mindset of quote unquote CRO. So I can understand that maybe in some large organizations, if you have a larger CRO team, you might work towards like embedding one or two CROs in every team, or I think that's a hybrid model. Then the center of excellence is literally just the CRO team working with everyone else.
I'm just thinking through your question again, because it was less about should CRO be a part of UX, and it's more like if there was any other team, should it still be associated with UX? And to that latter question, it kind of like falls into growth here. We don't honestly really do it as, extensively because we're kind of like just moving ship. But I would agree with you, whether you call engineering product, I'm assuming you're kind of nesting the two together, like the thing that's getting built, definitely see the value of CRO there because they're ultimately accountable for the experience, but that's only because UX is probably also part of the product.
I think I need to clarify my question better because is it CRO as a mindset or is it CRO as a role? Or I guess CRO as a process rather than the actual person? Because like you mentioned, you can have UX people doing CRO without actually a dedicated person to it. So I guess more like as a principle, UXers should be adopting that mindset of whatever the hell CRO does, UXers should be doing that thing, whatever it is. It's validating through testing and empiricism or conducting quantitative analyses. Talking to customers is super valuable, but that's one data source. It should be many data sources helping you inform on those decisions. And A/B testing, literally split A/B testing, is a tool in the toolkit of research.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I guess the not even counterpoint, the additional point I would make is that I see UX sitting within product. So you have like the thing that's getting built, the way there's an engineering side of like the technicals, there's the UX side, which is, the top of the iceberg that people are actually experiencing. And whether it's a CRO as a person or the mindset, agree, that is one of many tools in the toolbox to say, first of all, what should we build? That's not CRO, that's research in a traditional sense. It's discovery, which just a CRO might do, but it is not CRO, the verb. And then the verb of like the CRO monitoring how things are changing and monitoring different steps of the product and the user journey. That all to me like rolls up into, it might roll into UX, but UX to me is all part of the product experience. And yeah, but PX kind of is where UX is nested, which CRO serves all of that.
So it's a Matryoshka doll of
Yes.
CROs nested into UX, which should be nested in product.
Yes, although I guess there's also a scenario, right? And what I'm trying to think through is I think there's actually like CROs are also serving product, even in, like there's other pieces of product that aren't, right? Is that, I'm talking out loud here.
No, you're right.
There are scenarios where it's not 100% UX decisions.
Should it be?
That's what I'm thinking through. I feel like it should. I mean, again, this is if you have the luxury of having UX where we're like, we don't. So that's where in my head, I'm like, well, product needs to make these decisions, but that's only because we don't have UX.
I guess in a practical world, it's not true. Product owners will have decision making that can and probably will override UX at some point. But there are like, I don't know, there's certain things like there's no, like the iPod Touch was not, I don't know what went into the research for the iPod Touch, but like the way or the iPhone, they designed all of this stuff. And once you put it in your hands, you're like, this is great. And I'm sure there was some amount of like hippo driven thinking to like, yeah, there's some research, but this is revolutionary. And sometimes to be revolutionary, you have to think outside of the box and think outside of the data. And it's probably solving customer problems, but the solution's so maybe outside of the UX perspective. That being said, you still optimize it for UX. Like the product itself still has a customer focused, make it work well, make it like easy to make phone calls and text people and go on the internet and shit. All right, I know I'm kind of going a little bit off the radar here. I want to reel it back in. One thing I wanted to pick your brain a little bit deeper on is like, why is it that perhaps we have this bifurcation of UX and CRO that I think you and I now collectively agree that CRO should be embedded in the mindset of UX. But there are times, and I've dealt with folks in UX who just ignore the quant. Perhaps they have strong opinions. But why is it that like certain UX people tend to ignore that mindset of optimization or quantitative data? And in fact, like that one person I mentioned who said, too many people just try and A/B test their way to better conversions, talk to customers, when it's like, both, please, both. Like, it's not either or. We should do both.
My suspicion is because there are parallel reasons, but because measuring things was so hard for so long.
Oh, I love that.
I mean, you have people who came up through their ranks, right? Or like the discipline of UX didn't come from anything quantitative or measurable. And so it feels like you're reducing, that's where I mentioned qualitative before, feelings. Like there's a magic, there's a, whatever that you're pulling from theory and you're pulling from heuristics and all of that's like research backed, et cetera. But it wasn't like you're optimizing something to death, right? It's I guess that like baking versus cooking to them, where like suddenly you're measuring my baking soda ratio when really it's just like the wonderful dish that I'm like creating and putting forth. You can't like just measure the size of this button and tell me my work is not.
I'm sensing that you're a baker of sorts.
My mom is, I wish. But
yeah, are you more scientific where you're like measuring everything and your mom's eyeballing it?
Well, with baking, right? Baking is a science. So you have to have it down to, I mean, she's an ex-engineer, but then her cooking, yeah, you do your magic.
It's so interesting. And actually, I'm going to add to that. This is totally right. There's the science of like measuring your ability to know the decisions that you made are good or not feels more new to many folks, especially those who are deep into it. I want to say it's probably beyond UX into just marketing as a whole, right? Like I was taking my dog out for a walk a couple hours ago and I was like, I got a mail of like something. It was like a mailer for just coupons or whatever. And I was like, how do you measure any kind of success with this? Like the UTM parameters are not unique. It's just like for some of these things, it's like go to just our main website.com. And I'm like, how do you like, do you have to look at the time? Maybe we are in an age where analytics is abundant. 30 years ago, we didn't have that shit. How is anyone measuring any? It's like it's like for me, I cannot fathom a world where I don't use Google Maps to know where I'm going. With certain things. Like, hey, go to this new restaurant, print out instructions on MapQuest. Oh, okay. But like otherwise, I could not fathom a world without it. That feels like that's the thing. It's measuring your outcomes in marketing as a whole may feel new, even though for us it's not. We wouldn't do our jobs well at all if we couldn't. But to many folks, literally measuring the outcomes may feel new. And that's why maybe in that research field, there is more of a, maybe not aversion, because I don't think they're actively fighting it, but it's more of like, you don't know what you don't know.
Right. I suspect if there is aversion, it might feel like supervision, like you don't trust me to like know my craft. Okay. That aside, yes, you don't know what you don't know. I've seen, UX will then start to see the results of the data, and then they're like junkies, like give me more of the data. But then there's also this scenario where it's not even about like a not good CRO. Like if you don't have enough data or the A/B test is inconclusive, the UX is like, see, MapQuest got data where you want it to go, and now you want to add in your Google Maps and ways to detect the accident. There's the execution element that has to build confidence.
I wonder how many people listening to this know what MapQuest is.
I do. So
I do too. I printed that shit out to go places. But yeah, it's like I remember my mom listens to my podcast, so she'll hear this, but she used to literally ask Jeeves questions, like be super polite and ask Jeeves questions. Like you just type in words and it'll find it. You don't need to ask it a question.
Well, she was training for GPT this whole time.
Yeah,
now
true.
she's ready.
Honestly, yeah. Well, we want to be nice to our AI overlords anyway. They're going to take us over in like 6 months. So getting back to whatever the fuck we were talking about before, I guess I want to understand a little bit more. How can we, as CROs, instill in a not defensive way our mindset, our process, even ourselves, like insert ourselves in the process. So for those who are adverse to testing and believe that their UI is the best and be defensive, that's maybe one piece, and let's address that. And on the other piece, how do we talk to people who are maybe not aware of what we can do, what a test is? I've talked to people and I've been like, hey, do you know what a heat map is? And they're like, what is it? And you show them heat maps and they're like, this is creepy, but this is awesome. And I'm like, you think that's creepy? And I show them session recordings and they're like, oh, this is way worse. So like we have all these things available to us, but we shouldn't fault UX for not knowing what is available. So how do we talk to the defensive researcher and how do we get them interested in that process of quantitative testing, experimentation, optimization, and let them know like, look, we are literally on your team. We both have the same goals. Is it maybe metric alignment or something like that? How do we get UX to welcome us into the barn rather than be seen as enemies?
The metrics alignment piece feels like the right place to start, even at the very high level, right? Like what we're trying to achieve here is literally the same thing, even if it's, whether it's revenue or customers sticking around. But I also wonder if there's an element of what do you wish you could know if this works or it doesn't? Like, what are you, from a place of kind of curiosity, but also like, I bet that they never thought that they could measure or get clarity around, this decision that they made, and would they be interested to understand why? Now, if it's something trivial, or if they're like, well, I don't, whatever my reason here was just that blue is a comfort color. Okay, fine. We don't maybe need to test that. But for example, I don't know, the phrasing of CTAs, there's a lot of that, could be a whole debate where do you make it super simple so someone knows what they're getting, or do you go with something cute like, unlock your potential and, they.
Fuck that. No, I'm very skewed on if you have unlock your potential as a CTA, I will block you from my mind forever and always.
Yep. With you there. But there's the creativity element that the UX might bring into with our personalities or whatever. So I think I'm trying to like provoke what type of UX would reject this type of an approach. But it's basically like, I wonder if we were to test two different things. And when I'm going back to like, why are they territorial or where would they be hesitant? Probably an element of being wrong. But the point here is like, well, no, there's no one's wrong or right. We're both going back to the first part of this answer. We're both optimizing for either revenue or moving someone on or them submitting, unlocking their potential by booking the damn call is the point. Like, let's see which makes that happen more. But I don't know. I guess there's an element of like, I don't know if where it comes from is respect for the craft and like, there's the magic and like the doing of the thing. And then there's why and like the impact of it, which is what CRO is keeping everyone just honest on. But I wonder if there's like, what would you like to know if you could? And also we're aligned on this is the end goal here, right? Like, are you really just telling me like your, cushy phrases just for the sake of it? I don't know if that would do it.
I want to pick your brain a little bit deeper on the metric side. What specifically, because it's not as simple as, oh, you want to increase lead generation for this B2B site. I want to increase lead generation. We're on the same team. I don't think that'll satisfy them, right? Like, I think getting that alignment is important, especially from the leadership side. Something that I've done a lot of is like take steps back and instead of the solution, which is like blue CTA, unlock your potential, fucking stupid, but like that's the solution. Take it a step back to what is the hypothesis? What do we believe unlock your potential will solve for? Fucking nothing. It does nothing. It's a waste of your time. Never do it. Take a step back and then say like, what is the problem that user faced? The metric alignment around solving the problems is where I think UX and CRO can really collaborate on to say the problem with our site is that get started is so ambiguous and not helpful. And we are a company, I don't know, like I'm trying to strong arm unlock your potential on a website. I just can't. It's a stupid CTA text. Never use it. But like schedule your consultation is at least clear for, let's say you're trying to consult with like a CRO strategist, or let's just say someone like you need services. So schedule your consultation makes sense. But it's a problem that perhaps get started is ambiguous, but schedule your consultation is clear. And that problem of ambiguity is what CROs and UX can align on. Now, you might differ on how we want to solve. That person might be like, what is it? The unlock your potential? They might think it's the cutesy way to do it. And you might say, that's stupid. We should try this other way. But I think at least aligning with the problems, with the ultimate goals in mind of metrics might help. Do you agree with that? Or do you have any other thoughts on like other ways to help with alignment on metrics and like fleshing out that metric alignment more?
I think the hypothesis approach makes a ton of sense. I guess that's where, I phrased it as curiosity, but it's sort of like, what's the thing that we're mutually trying to test here and understand? But a hypothesis is more, it's kind of scientific, but it removes any sort of emotion. It's just sort of like, here's like something that we're curious if one way works in a different way than the other. There's probably also an element of like, what do I do with this information in that like CRO doesn't necessarily spit out the right answer all the time, right? Like it might clearly show A is better than B sometimes, but I could imagine like a UX being like, well, unlock your potential and, get started, right? They could be mutually just shit options and it's not going to spit out the better one. But even that stems back from like, if we were trying to achieve a certain outcome, the hypothesis is that this CTA will move us towards more bookings, will, help us get more whenever's scheduled to test it. It feels like, I don't know, it feels very objective and again, neutral from an emotional perspective, but I just...
So I'm curious what you think about this. It's probably in the hypothesis of like, because. What is the because? Because the because is likely backed in some data. Hopefully it's backed in some data. We believe, what is this? Unlock your potential. I hate that I've said it. So everyone drink. That's a drinking game now. But we believe that unlock your potential will generate more leads. Sure, you have the alignment on the conversion rates as the metric. Well, what's the because? Like, help me, UX person. Why do you think that'll help? If your answer is because it's cutesy, that's a shitty answer. If it's because we talked to the customers and they're really interested in potential or growing from where they are at a baseline, I don't know, like I could perhaps see some option there. Then you're like, okay, that actually makes a ton of sense. On the flip side, I'm sure you've dealt with this. A lot of times what customers say they want is not what they actually want. And that's where I think that UX person, I'm going to go back to this person who says like, talk to people because too many people just try to A/B test their way at a better conversion. The entire flip side is if you talk to someone, they might tell you what they want in their eyes, but they can't verbally communicate it. I talked to Eden about this, by the way, and she fleshed this out pretty deeply. Like a lot of times they'll tell you what they want, but it's on you as a researcher to read a little bit deeper into like what that solution looks like.
Right.
And that's almost where I think that's that perfect opportunity for CRO and UX to put on that same hat, go in that same room and take the same data sets and create something together rather than perhaps like a UX person saying, hey, CRO monkey, go test this, right? Like that's just not a good partnership.
Yeah. I'm trying to think through like the biases that each is bringing into because, we're laughing about this unlock your potential piece and this hypothetical of the UX person might be citing some data that, I don't know, some customers have said something about we have so much more potential. So that's where they pulled it from. But the CRO has, call it overly, monkified, quantitative orientation, but like, they're not pushing back because they want to be an asshole. They're pushing back because they think it's not going to work for a reason, because they've probably done it 10 times. They're probably out there study. I mean, I think about that. Like whenever I push back on something, it is nothing personal. It's like, are we really sure are we positive that's the right way? If you've got the data that says, yes, great. Again, we have this hypothesis. You think this language works. Me as a CRO is saying, I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's clear enough for the average Joe who comes to our site, even if they're an ICP Joe, that it's going to do the job, that like they're going to know what potential means and what they're going to, like, are they booking a call or are they getting a free sample? But where like UX's bias is saying, I guess, just like we've done research. And so we're pulling from the research to make good use of it. It's funny because I'm like, I guess I'm more of the researcher here, but I'm way more of a CRO mindset where I'm like aligning with those people.
I think that's the perfect intersection or the perfect Frankenstein of like, I think it's totally great to be a UX person with a CRO mindset. I don't want to say Frankenstein because it's not about like taking a bunch of discarded parts and putting them together. It's a perfect union, and it's almost like a yin and yang where it should be that UX and CRO kind of have, I don't want to say downfall. They have different things that they're focused on perhaps, but when together, they're a superpower. So yeah, okay, so this is great. I think metrics is a very interesting topic around how do we get people aligned with UX and CRO. So I think metrics alignment through problem statements or something, that's great. I think something else that I wanted to dig a little bit deeper with you on is like, is it almost aggregating the UX research and the data and the qualitative data and the quantitative data through the testing and creating a shared repository of all insights together? Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is a very loaded question that like more and more, there's so much data you can pull from. And it's like no company is really, I've yet to like interact with a company that's like really nailed how this works, especially because it's one thing to have the repository of all of things, all the relevant things. And then secondly, to make it accessible for someone to use, for this type of a persona. What is this study say and this product data say and this qual research say? This is where like from teams I've worked with and in my experience working with companies, like there's like a person or an intelligence function that is helping to like basically be the librarian of like all of the information. Because at some point, again, you can have a world-class repository. If no one goes and knocks on that door, it's useless. You can have like 2 things in your repository, another breaking point. And then you can also go and you can spend your days like roaming through the, proverbial stacks of your repository's library, not finding what's relevant to your ask. AI, I think, is starting to figure out ways to solve this more, but somebody who knows like kind of the dynamics of this study, like someone might even just know, hey, this was done in Asia. It's not going to be relevant to this test that you're designing for the US. So like you think it's, cookie cutter, but it's not. That said, I am the biggest advocate for like research has probably been done, if not internally, then like maybe externally where there's some like, something you can leverage just as a starting point. So you're not starting at 0, you're starting at 2 or 10 on your way to 100. Also, the jump to solution is a repository, and that's not necessarily the end all be all.
Yeah,
either.
so it's interesting. I'm trying to visualize what a database of A/B tests and research studies combined together. It almost does feel like fitting a square peg in a round hole because each one requires such different sets of inputs and data. The only consolidation is like, here's a link to the Google Doc, here's the title, here's the method, and here are the insights, like maybe if that. So I would love if people have like ways they've consolidated, perhaps they could share in the comments or DM us. I'd love to kind of dig a little bit deeper into that. So maybe that's a high maturity thing to do, or a very complicated problem to solve for that might take a lot of time, or maybe a dedicated product owner or program manager who manages the relationship between them. Something I do like weekly. I have a weekly sync with the SEO guy on my team, with the designers, with the web leads. Like every week I'm meeting with them, letting them know, here's some interesting data I found. Here's the test results. Here's what I'm thinking. It's a forcing function of visibility where that person has to pay attention to me for 30 minutes. And I have 30 minutes to let them know things I'm working on. And they have 30 minutes. We share the 30 minutes, but they have to let me know what they're working on. And I have to let them know what I'm working on. And that way there's a shared like, oh, that's interesting. You're working on that. Actually, have we tried testing this? Maybe we could test it. Or they come to the table and they're like, we're trying to design this new component. And I'm like, when we ran this test for here, it didn't necessarily work as well. So perhaps we want to redo it. Some of the aha moments, some of the catches can be saved with frequent syncs. I know in this world of post-pandemic Zoom meetings all the time, people hate just meetings. It's not unique to the pandemic. I think people just hate meetings all the time. But I would say this is a valuable meeting that's worth having 100%.
Yeah, I mean, what you just described is basically right. I described like some sort of market intelligence or librarian, one person. You guys are 3 people or 2 people or however many are showing up who have your different perspectives, which is better than like that brain trust is the repository. And it's going to be way more useful than you having to go through your SEO's database and read and understand it, this and that, and them coming to you and having to figure out the sample and oh, I remember this. Let me go pull this file, or I know off the top of my head. So yeah, short answer is that's a great approach.
Exactly. And like, I guess in a perfect world, right, you could self-serve and find that information on your own, but we don't live in a perfect world. Databases will never be exactly the way we intend them to. That seems like a very perfectly reasonable, easy to accomplish thing that you could do tomorrow. Just book time on your SEO guy's calendar, your product owner, your UX. I know this is more UX, but you could do that with any function. I had a couple other things as well. I think this was more of just like advice for CROs from a fellow CRO, which is just be fucking helpful. Like if UX is just thinking about something or they have questions, theoretically, maybe they could go into analytics and find it on their own. But if you can do it much quicker than they can, or you could help them answer questions and you're seen as that helpful person, I would assume if you will feel the same way. Like if you're working with someone who just always wants to help you, you're more motivated to collaborate with that person and more motivated to share the information. And you're probably going to be seen as less defensive if that person's going out of their way to help you out, you know?
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm trying to think through like, what's the pushback of like, well, this is going to, if you have data that you're coming to me with, great, that's helpful. If you're wanting to layer a test into what I'm doing, and it's like, just let it rip, like, let's go and like do this thing. But I think, again, that goes back to the KPIs and also what you're incentivized to do. Like, are you trying to make this thing successful, or are you just trying to ship, UX change or whatever? But yeah, I mean, if there's data that's interesting and helpful, I think taking the mindset of, again, my appetite is for data. So someone coming to me, like I'm creating more of it. And, again, our size and stage, I'm begging for it. And it's more like, unlock your insights is not important to us. But if, being receptive to this is nothing about this is personal. It's like literally data, and it's something that'll help you make a decision and inform, your work. It's not.
It shouldn't be personal. People take it personally though, because people are human, right? But I mean, yeah. I think just be helpful as you can, because I think that just decreases the resistance towards wanting to work with this person. And I don't know, like even if you go on the data and you offer them suggestions or thoughts that it's like, hey, this design's great. By the way, here's the evidence to help you back this up and get this thing approved. That almost gives them more inclination to want to seek you out and work with you if maybe for the first couple times you're giving them data to support their initiatives, but you're building that bridge, you're fostering that collaboration, and then you could grow from there. I'm going to ask you one last thing before we jump over to the next section. So I was reading this blog post and Andrew Anderson had this comment, and I'm interested how you would perceive this, because I think this might actually be interesting on the defensive side of people that they might not want to do this. Andrew Anderson's tactic is, before you ship out any test, if you're talking with UX, before you ship out any test, force the UX team to look at the test and explain why that test would win, but also why that test would lose. Because I think that's an interesting exercise that, one, you could almost like cherry pick data to support whatever you want. So it's almost on the CRO to try and be as less cherry picky. It's also on UX too, but it's an interesting tactic. It gives that UX person that mindset of testing, knowing there is a potential for this to win. There's a potential for this to lose. That's why we're doing the quantitative piece. You know,
to me, that goes right back to the like emotion or territoriality piece. It could go one way, it could go the other. This is not about me having the right answer. It's about getting to the right answer that we collectively each did our part to arrive at. The CRO is setting up a research that tests or proves or disproves a hypothesis is the point. It's not purposely biased. So I think I like that idea a lot.
Yeah, this is funny. I think this is actually a really good way to like suss out if you're fighting a combative UX person versus like if they are happy to provide both sides of the story, you're probably working with a more CRO-minded UX person.
Right. Rational is another word for it. But anyway.
Okay. I think that's a good wrap for this first part of the episode. Victoria, what is it now time for?
Shit you need to know.
Let's go. This week's Shit You Need to Know comes courtesy of Sandip Amlani. He's a freelance consultant, ex-Cisco, super certified homie, really, really great person. Make sure you all follow him on LinkedIn. So his Friendly Friday reminder, and I teased this earlier in the episode around kind of accessibility and ADA. His Friendly Friday reminder is designed for accessibility first, then user experience, then aesthetics. If your users can't use your site because of poor color or contrast or keyboard accessibility, it doesn't matter how pretty the site looks, and I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit. If your users can't find the information that they need, or the site's slow, or tasks take too long, it doesn't matter what the coat of paint is on the site. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the hierarchy you broke it down into, where I would conflate 1 and 2, where it's sort of like you cannot do 2 without 1.
You can't have good user experience without accessibility. Like your site doesn't have a good UX without it being accessible, basically.
Right. I mean, because there's, there might be the counter argument that like certain layers of accessibility. I mean, there's certain versions of accessibility that are for example, colorblind or like actual accessibility. There's also like going from mobile to desktop. If that doesn't work, it means you're alienating part of your user base. So if you're like not optimizing for the full user experience, it's not you're doing only part of user experience. So I guess I'm provoking like, is there even a hierarchy there? I do understand the point, and I definitely agree with like the different words almost to break down his steps are like function and then format or aesthetic. I know the third bucket is literally aesthetic, but it's like if the site doesn't do the thing that it's supposed to do, which is work on mobile, let alone work for all people of the population who are trying to access the site, then like you haven't like really fleshed out an experience because it's just for a subset of the users. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. But I guess I'm curious, have you seen that there's a meaningful distinction where like, let's just get 2 nailed first and skip over what he described as 1?
Aaron Weigel has red-pilled me into accessibility as being incredibly important. Like I understood that sites, like it was in the back of my mind, like, oh yeah, have alt image text and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, we'll have alt image text because of SEO. And e-readers is something like screen readers and stuff, having, not having a mouse and being able to use the site, all that stuff. It's like, maybe it's just my privilege as, being an able-bodied person, but like you never think about these things. It's out of sight, out of mind for me. And now Aaron's like red-pilled me super hard into like, no, accessibility is super fucking important. And, I kind of go back and forth with her a little bit on this because there's some basic things that I think accessibility, you don't test it. You just do it. Like you have alt image text. You don't test that. I don't know if you'd been able to even test it. I guess you could have it on versus off, but like certain things you just have to fix. It has to work for certain subsets of users. Then there's probably a bucket of accessibility things that you could validate through testing to make sure the user experience is actually improving. And that's another thing. That's not CRO. At least I wouldn't call it the traditional bullshit definition of CRO. That's just stuff that you should be doing because you're user focused and you're creating a better user experience. And, someone with a disability is still an important user on your site. Like they're not worth less or worth more. They're an important user to your site, just like anyone else. Accessibility is just so fucking important. But for me, I never really thought about it as a thing to do besides like the WCAG checklist stuff like, oh, just do this checklist and move on. But it's just like CROs, a mindset. Accessibility is almost its own mindset, you know?
Yeah, I think you summed it up well, that there's like, you either do it or you don't, as in like it needs to be done. There's definitely a layer of optimization within that. Even if you're talking about, the alternate text, right? There's a CRO element to it, but like, the point is it needs to be there, just the same way that, there needs to be a menu to be able to access different pages of the website, which was never a question all along. I think his third bucket, as described in the post, is sort of like, that's marginal theoretically. Is that going to make or break? Like, you literally don't have UX without those other two buckets. But I guess that's why it's shit you need to know. You need to know it. You need to do it.
It's probably like a pyramid, right? Like the UX and accessibility is at the bottom of the pyramid. And that is foundational. That is shit you need. It's shit you need to know, but it's shit you need to have, right? Like that is the first layer. And aesthetics is a nice to have secondary. And I'm not saying don't do it. You should be doing it. And if you're doing accessibility stuff while doing aesthetic stuff, that's probably a fine trade-off. I'm okay with that personally. It is a foundational thing that your site has to be accessible. And there are some things you absolutely have to do. And there's some other things that you should probably test into. But I think it's very much like a pyramid. That's stuff you have to do it. You just have to do it. You could say that you care about accessibility, but if you don't put your money where your mouth is and actually do the things that improve accessibility, then it's fucking useless. So actually spend the time and think about those users who need the help to give them accessible sites.
Yep. Just as viable as users. So you need to do the work to make sure you can reach and resonate with them. Yep.
All right, Victoria, I think that'll wrap this episode of From A to B. Thank you so much for joining us. Anything you want to plug, anything you want to make sure that people find out the content you're creating and best way for people to find you?
You can always find me on LinkedIn. I'll lean heavily on the research side, but I also, as I said earlier, it's qual and quant. It's both. It's never a battle of the egos, battle of the, personal vendettas or whatever about one function versus the other. I think it's all about both. And so, yeah, just a little bit of data into your magic, and everything's happily ever after.
Perfect. Victoria the Warrior, thank you so much for joining us.
Cheers. Thank you.